Thank you, Eddie. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to give 2 seconds to the guys to introduce themselves. So, first of all, Tony.
Good afternoon. My name's Tony Allen. I'm the Design and Development Director for Ròya International. We're a Dubai-based hospitality consultancy.
Hi, I'm Phil Churchman. I'm a Director with the Hotels Cost Management team at AECOM, old school quantity surveyor, based out of London, but our hotel hospitality reach covers the whole of the Europe and the Middle East area.
Great, thank you. So, the purpose of this panel is to look at what is it? What are the key factors that engineers, designers, contractors need to keep in mind when developing hotel properties? You know, what's the optimal way to plan and construct a hotel? Look at the costs and keep them reduced as far as we can, so that we're given as much operational efficiency into the asset once it's in occupation and use. So I'd like to have a chat with Tony and Phil and look at what are some of those key challenges that we need to consider. So first off to you, Tony, I suppose let's start at the beginning of the whole development process. What in your experience are the key factors to setting up a project from the outset with the right conditions for success?
I think from the outset it's getting all the parties aligned. We have a developer who has a vision, we'll have an architect who has a vision, we'll have a hotel brand or hotel operator that has a vision, we'll have a MEP consultant that has a vision, we'll have a quantity surveyor who has a different vision, and all have different expectations. It's getting those expectations and understanding really what the developer's desire is, and everybody aligned within fairly defined parameters of what it is that the end product needs to be. So it's really getting alignment and clear understanding of what the developer, what the owner's expectation is at the end of the project.
So it's pretty much about definition of brief and getting the brief clarified from the outset.
It all comes down to brief, from my experience, and that's defining what the client wants, what he's willing to pay for, what the market will stand, and then setting that and making sure there's a proper briefing process that goes not just out from the client to the designers, but also back from the designers back to the client, the owner and the operator, to make sure that we don't get further down the design phase with big changes coming ahead. If you get all that nailed on day one, or as soon as you can in the project, it really gives you the project a much better footing, and you're not having to go back and making expensive changes.
I suppose the ultimate question there then is enough time spent in that initial feasibility stage and definition of the brief before we get into the nuts and bolts of design moving forward?
I would argue probably not, from the experience we've had on projects. And it's not just that period from the day you get a designer on board. It's the work you do before you have that. When you get to a point where you have, say, a plot of land that you're even thinking of purchasing, it's doing the studies into the market to make sure that you're properly researching what will the market stand. Does the market need another 5-star hotel? Is there actually a gap in the market, in the mid-market? Do you need another 4 restaurants being built into a hotel? It's not about that. It's about making sure that the requirements of the market will then sustain a business case for a property. And to be honest, we probably don't spend as much time doing that as we do in the feasibility stage of the design phase.
Tony, taking that point then, so once we spent the right time in the feasibility stage, what are the key principles that you'd like to see or consider when embarking on the design of a hospitality project, be it 5-star luxury, be it mid-market? Are there any guiding principles that you think need to be adopted?
Hotels tend to be quite seductive developments. People are very often seduced by hotels. They feel they're glamorous, they feel they're exciting, they feel they're sexy developments. All of that's true, but developers are developing them because they're looking for a return. They're looking very often for a long-term return. Hotels offer long-term investment. They're not assets that get churned very often. They're not assets that get sold. So yes, the necessity to really understand the market and to anticipate the market, anticipate the trends is there, and to build a property that's going to set itself correctly in its market position. There's no point in building a super luxury 5-star property in a location that can't support a super 5-star luxury property. So it's understanding the whole thing and the long term. People that build hotels are building a building as a business to be run for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
What about the impact of the operators and the brand standards that come along with that, and how they interact and fit in with design principles?
Again, I think it's a matter of alignment. It's a matter of the developer aligning their expectations and the operator's expectations, and it's a long-term relationship. It's a relationship that's typically 10 years plus 10 years plus 5 years in a normal management contract. So it's a long-term relationship, and getting that alignment in place. We sometimes get into situations where operators, people say, "Oh, the operator has this big long wish list." Well, you need to understand what their wish list is going to be before you get into the relationship with them, and if their brand has particular brand standards or brand requirements, understand that and cost it and see what the value is before you sign the contract with them.
Do you think it's important to have the brand in place before you commence design?
Not necessarily. We've seen developments where the operators are involved virtually on day one, and we've seen developments that are equally successful where the operator comes maybe 9 months before the project is complete. It both can work, both have benefits and disadvantages, but either can work. I think now with the more specialist brands that are coming, some of the lifestyle brands, getting the operator on board early is certainly an advantage. With some of the very upscale brands that have very specific requirements, getting the operator on board early can be an advantage. For the more mainstream hotel brands, I think it's less important.
Okay. Phil, just to move this on now into a bit more of the nitty-gritty around some of the key elements around cost efficiencies. Where do you see the biggest cost impacts during the whole project development cycle? And any guiding principles that you think need to be put in place to ensure that as design develops, we end up with a cost-effective solution from a construction standpoint?
Well, by far the two sort of key metrics that determine what the overall cost of a project are going to be, the most blatantly one is area per key. Yeah. If you've got that bang on where on a benchmark figure, your building should be more or less within the correct boundaries. But a poorly defined brief with additional scope creep, for instance, if you're adding in more restaurants than you require, or say a gym, so it goes back to what I was saying about the brief. If you're over specifying areas because the market, you think your project wants them, whereas the market necessarily won't stand it, you're going to be building more area than you need. The other is in terms of sort of the quality of the products you're producing. Again, you need to make sure that the brief and the target audience for those two things is correct. And also you're bringing your design team along with you on that journey. If you're designing a 4-star hotel, there's no point in having an interior designer along on the journey that is going to be specifying ridiculous finishes. You know, it's about design appropriateness and making sure that the brief, both from the team and from the team to the client and vice versa, is defined at the earliest point. The other big thing that can have an impact on cost is change. If you get your brief and your proper commercial drivers in place in the first instance, it should change what is described as value engineering, which is actually generally cost cutting, into true value engineering, where you're actually looking at the form and function of what you're designing and the requirements that you've got for it, so that what you can do is make sure the building is right from the get-go and you're not trying to cut costs on towards the end of a job, which usually ends up impacting on the finishes, which is the one bit you don't want to be impacting on, because that's the bit that the clients and your customers are touching and feeling, and you don't want to be scrimping on that when you could have made better decisions earlier on in the design process.
Tony, anything further to add to that
Absolutely. Point? It's a picture I recognise quite a lot, and once the concrete's poured in the ground or the structure's built or the MEP's in, there's not a lot you can do to save there. And given a fixed budget, it's whatever comes along at the end of the process, whether it's the finishes, whether it's the FF&E and furniture, whether it's the OS&E and the cups and saucers, or very often and not, whether it's the landscaping and the whole environment that the building and the hotel sits in. So yeah, I recognise that planning, and I think value engineering is quite a strange concept. I don't think there's very much real value or engineering in the process. It tends to be one of either substitution or omission.
That's why I'm saying if you get in early enough, true value engineering is about going back to basics on, say, form, function, and requirements. What people call value engineering in the construction phase is typically when you've done an estimate at the end of a design phase and it's more expensive and you've got to start cutting cost out. And that's not where you want to be in the middle of a design process, because it just causes delay and more cost.
We've spoken a lot around the development process and trying to design and build the right asset from at the most appropriate cost. Do you think enough credence and enough thought is given to the longer term operation of hotel assets in that design and construction stage? So maximising the use of the more appropriate MEP systems, for example, to make sure that you've got operational efficiencies in the longer term when actually running the asset.
Yes, I think there is, and I think we've seen it certainly here in Dubai in the dozen or so years I've been here. 10 years ago, there wasn't a hotel built that didn't have its own laundry. Today, the market has moved on. There are commercial laundries, and we don't build laundries anymore in expensive downtown real estate. We move out. We've seen, as we heard the previous session, staffing numbers come down. Staffing numbers, everybody needs a changing room, everybody needs a shower, so we see that. And certainly as the market grows and develops, and there are developers and asset owners who have long-term hold plans for their assets and for their hotels, operational costs, running costs, energy and utility costs certainly aren't going down. We see more and more emphasis on that as people start to appreciate the long-term life cycle costs of development.
So a bit more capex should
Bit
help
more
to,
capex, yeah,
help to
yeah.
yield some
Bit
longer-term
more saving
operational.
down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Conscious of time, just want to open up to the floor if there's any particular questions for Tony or for Phil. Yes.
Thanks very much, gents. Can you give me, from your perspective and experiences, I'm sure you can manage this, give us an example from a design and engineering point of view and a QS point of view of an hotel in this market that you feel, from the extent that you can see, is really working. Is there a model here? When you go into the hotel, you say, look at that, it not only looks beautiful and it works wonderfully, it's beautifully designed, it's obviously very efficient, and the designers and the builders and the engineers have really done a good job on that. Is there any project in Dubai, UAE, or the region you would like to cite? You can actually recommend your own work if you wish.
Well, naturally.
Can't be that hard.
Well, it's interesting because I was looking the other day. If you go from Trade Centre roundabout to Defence roundabout, Dubai Mall roundabout, there's 16 or 17 hotels all sitting on the same 100-foot by 100-foot or double 200-foot by 100-foot plot, and everyone is completely different. Everyone has a completely different room count, completely different configuration, completely different look and feel. So I guess in the marketplace, Dubai has not really been a one solution fits all. I suspect as we see development come through the 4- and 3-star hotel, we'll see a lot more perhaps standardization and modularization and conformity, more cookie cutter type solutions. Do you know any?
Yeah. I would agree entirely with Tony's comments there. I mean, there are some great examples of really well-designed hotels in the region, but if I sit here with a QS hat on, and you can't help but think that there's a lot of area in some of these hotels that didn't necessarily need to be there. So I think, as Tony alludes to, as we move forward, particularly in the mid-market and the 4-star segment, there'll be a lot more attention paid to designing more efficiently and cutting some unnecessary area out. Any other questions before we wrap up? I think we're pretty much out of time. Call it a day. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you'd show your appreciation, please, to Tony and Phil. Thank you.